Growing up, it seemed my parents were always correcting my manners. Chew with your mouth closed. Sit up straight. Use your napkin. Manners seemed silly and unimportant. I especially disliked learning how to hold my utensils properly. I couldn't understand why the caveman grip was a problem. But despite not liking to learn manners, I was a good girl. I wanted to be a nun for many of the years when I was growing up. There was something about their piousness that called to my perfectionist tendencies, my need to always be good and loving, especially as my parents' marriage slowly disintegrated. I thought that by being the perfect daughter, I could keep their marriage together. Well, sadly, perfection did not serve me well, and they ultimately divorced. My dad remarried a few years later, and my younger brother and I moved in with him and my stepmom. Much to my dismay, my stepmother thought we were barbarians. She tormented us again by teaching us a whole nother set of manners. Elbows off the table. Don't reach, ask. I felt judged, and I didn't like it. By the time I went off to college and I was on my own, I wanted nothing to do with manners. I rebelled, and I went from good girl to wild girl. I got a tattoo, I partied hard, and I didn't care what anyone thought of me. I eventually grew up, and I worked for several nonprofit organizations until I landed at Washington Mutual. And I was responsible for managing the community sponsorships for nonprofit organizations. Part of my job was to fill tables for the fundraising events that were part of our sponsorship, the breakfasts, the dinners. Inevitably, there would be someone, usually a couple of people, that would sit down at the table and look panicked at the array of utensils, the plates, the glasses. I could see them glance furtively at their neighbor, wondering which utensil to use or which bread plate belonged to them. It was then that I realized what I had learned as a child may have value to me. Apparently, I was listening to my parents. Whoops. A few years later, I ended up at a credit union, and I was surprised that I was asked to give etiquette advice to the CEO. He would ask me questions like, should I wear a jacket to this meeting? Which politician should speak first at this branch opening? I was so surprised, but flattered. Me, sometimes awkward, former wild girl, was being asked to advise the CEO? But I found that I really enjoyed advising him and having the knowledge that I could give to him to help him be more confident and comfortable when approaching various situations. It was then that I realized there was something to etiquette consulting that sounded appealing. And that old need for perfection was calling to me. But since I was married and in love with my husband, being a nun would not cut it. So I went to the Etiquette Institute in St. Louis, Missouri, and I got trained in business, social, and children's etiquette. I launched my business shortly thereafter. I was thrilled with my new designation as etiquette consultant until I discovered the downsides to being an etiquette consultant. When I tell people what I do, they don't want to sit next to me at the luncheon. They spend hours writing me one email, and they worry whether they should address me as Ms. Kleiss or Arden. And at networking events, upon hearing what I do, people get especially nervous, and I get the, "Oh," response. And suddenly they remember they left their lights on in their car. But the especially difficult downside to being an etiquette consultant is that I put so much pressure on myself to be the perfect role model. It is, after all, what called me to the profession. I was hoping that being an etiquette consultant would make me perfect. But sadly, I discovered I am not perfect. I am far from perfect. I make mistakes all the time. I forget people's names. I spill food. I even let an occasional swear word out of my mouth. I know, shocking. So what's a flawed etiquette consultant to do? Well, what any good etiquette professional would do, consult the experts. So I turned to etiquette pioneers Amy Vanderbilt and Emily Post. Well, I turned to their books because they're dead now. And I looked through those books looking for any mention of etiquette equaling perfect behavior. And I saw none, not a one mention. And I was comforted by that. I also realized that probably the reason people get nervous when they hear what I do is they're afraid they need to be flawless. And then if they're not, I will judge them. I was thinking that when I realized etiquette is really not about being perfect, I thought, my WAMU colleagues, actually, let me back up, being imperfectly perfect. Lesson number 1. It's okay to be perfectly imperfect. Etiquette is not about being perfect. Etiquette is simply guidelines and rules for how to handle professional and social situations. It is knowing how to navigate the world easier. When we know what to do, we can relax. Isn't it nice when we can relax? And so I realized that my WAMU colleagues would have been so much more comfortable if they had simply known that you start with the utensils farthest from the plate and work your way in towards the plate, and that your bread plate is always on the left and your glasses are always on the right. But perhaps even more comforting was when I discovered the difference between etiquette and manners. Etiquette, manners, is sort of the sister to etiquette. It's about being a kind and gracious person. There's a saying, and it goes something like this. I believe it's by Emily Post. Etiquette is knowing which fork to use. Manners is not saying anything when your neighbor doesn't. My friend Beth Bilo of the Introvert Entrepreneur, who is here today, said to me, etiquette makes you more comfortable. Manners makes others more comfortable. I thought that was really nicely put. So, if you forget someone's name, you use the wrong fork, but you're a kind and gracious person, it really doesn't matter. Kindness is what matters. Kindness rules. So I'm going to share with you some manners, tips, things that can help you to be a little bit kinder, because last time I shared etiquette tips. First one, be courteous. Say please and thank you. Those are such powerful words. Be helpful to people. Hold doors open. I remember a few years ago, I was at a workshop, and it was very crowded. There was a lot of people. There was one chair that was open next to me, and I thought, boy, if someone comes in that door, there's no way they're going to be able to reach the chair. Well, sure enough, someone did come in. So I picked up the chair, and I carried it over to this woman, and you would have thought I had just given her $1 million. She was so grateful. She even tweeted about it later. It's not hard to be courteous. Put your phone away. This is such a big one. How often do we pull out our phone when we're talking to someone and just totally not pay attention to them? Focus on the person in front of you. Give them your priority. They are your priority. Give them your full attention. And don't be tempted by it by putting on the table. Turn it off and put it away. Don't let the buzz, the ring, the light beckon you to look at it. Acknowledge others. When Colin Powell was Secretary of State, actually he wrote a book about his experiences called It Worked for Me. And in it, he explained a time when he walked down to the White House garage, and there were the attendants there, and he walked up to one of the attendants and he said, "Tell me, how do you decide who's going to be parked in at the front and who gets to be towards the back so they can leave easier?" And one of the attendants looked sort of sheepish. "Well, Mr. Powell, it's like this. When you drive up to the booth, you roll your window down, you say good morning, you remember our name, we'll put you towards the back. But if you come up to that booth, keep your window up, you don't acknowledge us, you're going straight to the front. You'll have to wait." So take some time to acknowledge the people that make your life easier. Say thank you and good morning to the barista, to the sales clerk, to the janitor, the people that are there that really deserve as much of our attention as anyone else. And lastly, be forgiving. So I want to share a really amazing story that was a colleague of mine posted on Facebook. She and her friend, another mother, and their toddlers were at a upscale family restaurant. They were enjoying their meal. The kids were eating hamburgers and fries, being usual kids, not being any louder or obnoxious than any other kid is. When dessert was served, a woman who had been sitting nearby came over to them and started yelling at them at how disturbed she was at how loud and obnoxious their kids were. She continued to yell and say what terrible mothers they were and that they shouldn't even be there. My colleague tried to calmly engage with her, but she continued to scream and yell at them until finally the restaurant manager came over and intervened and moved the woman and her party to another area of the restaurant. He comped the mother's meals and gave them gift certificates and asked, as they were leaving, if there was anything else he could do to make their experience better. And my colleague stopped and she paused and thought, this woman must really have a lot of negative things going on in her life. She must really need some kindness. So she decided to pay for this woman and her group's meals. Not because she was apologizing, but because she was turning the other cheek. She was being forgiving, and showing her kindness. So, when you are out and about, There's so many different ways that we can practice etiquette and manners in all of our encounters. Whether you're getting on the bus, you're buying a cup of coffee, you're mingling at the holiday party, or you're dining with a client. If you forget what to do, you use the wrong fork, forgive yourself, just as you would forgive someone else. And remember, it's okay to be perfectly imperfect. Etiquette is not about being perfect. Instead, focus on having a kind heart, and you will go far. So before I take questions, I would just like to mention one thing, that if you are interested in getting etiquette tips, you may take your phone out. This is the one time you can do it with an etiquette consultant. And you can text the word manners to the number 22828. I also have other ways that you can get etiquette tips, and I hope that you will connect with me. So I'd love to take some questions if there are any. Yes, Tracy.
I just have a comment. I've been with Arden for a long time and have followed her on Facebook, and I think for the people I know who engage with people on Facebook, I find what Arden shares to be very fascinating and relevant. So I always love seeing people's comments, and when I share it with my friends, especially, I remember last year you shared, I think it was around the holidays, about not putting your silverware back on the tablecloth. And I just remember thinking, oh, I needed that reminder. And how many people, all the different comments, one of my friends was like, oh, who could not know that? And so I was like, whoa, I didn't know that. And it's just a fun conversation.
Yeah, we don't always know. Thank you, Tracy. I appreciate your subscribing. Yes.
When departing an elevator and there's multiple people in the elevator, what's the proper etiquette as far as how long to hold the door, allow out first? There always seems to be some hesitancy. You go, no, you go.
Right. Yeah. So, it's funny, elevators still sort of fall back to chivalry. It's the one area of both business and social that has that element of chivalry. So typically, if you are a man and you're in the front, you would hold the door open and let people out, unless you doing that would block the way for people. And also, same thing with letting people, men and women, on. It's always nice as a man to let others go before you. But really, it's nice for anyone to let others go before you. But the rule is basically, if you're going to sort of boggle up people from getting on and off, then just go ahead and get on. Yeah. Anything else? Yes, Beth?
So I know you've done a lot of consulting and coaching with people, professionals. What do you feel like is the piece of advice you repeat the most?
Piece of advice that I repeat the most. I mentioned a lot about the phone. That's a big one. Yeah, really, just how important it is to put your phone away. But so often it's sort of reinforcing what people already know. They may be, doubting that they have knowledge that they actually do. And so it's a lot of just helping people to realize what they do know, which is great. I love that part. You're doing great. So, yeah. Good. Well, I think my time is up. Thank you so much for being here, and turn it over to the next great speaker.